Hi, my name is Shani, and welcome to the Experienced Designers Podcast, where we explore the human experience, what it is, and how we might create better ones for ourselves and for others. In this episode, I'm joined by Eva Hamboldt, an organizational consultant with a love for neuroleadership who has written the book, The Feedback Revolution. We take you on a dance around the topic of feedback, what it is, and why it needs a facelift. And we explore together what the brain actually needs for us to communicate, connect, and help encourage each other's growth in more constructive ways than what we assume today. And we philosophize a little bit around why it depends is often the best answer, but often the most difficult one to receive. Welcome, Eva.
Thank you, Shani.
I'm super excited to have you here and for us to have this conversation. A lot of what you talk about and teach has followed me for a long time, and I'm excited to bring it to more people with you. I'm thinking one of the main things that you talk about or not talk about is feedback. You have a bone to pick with feedback. And you recently published a book called The Feedback Revolution, or in Swedish, which is the native language of the book, Feedback Revolutionen.
Yes.
So before we talk about what the book is about, I'm just really curious, what brought you to write the book?
Well, it's a long story, but to make it short, I've worked as a consultant for many years, and I have delivered different trainings and workshops and leadership coaching where feedback has been central. I've praised it. I've stood up and said, feedback is the way to go in order to create better teamwork, or in order to develop as a human being, or in your role. But somehow along the way, as I got to know the new discipline called neuroleadership, which came from the States, and David Rock, who is also a consultant, but has created this, he calls it a discipline, I call it a perspective, which is the brain's perspective on how we lead ourselves and how we work with leadership in organizations and how we work with developing processes, ways of working in organizations. And when I got to understand a little bit more about how the brain works and how vulnerable we are as social creatures, and what can be very threatening to the brain, maybe we don't think about it as threatening, but we can experience some kind of discomfort when we enter into a feedback process. Whether we give it or have to receive it, doesn't matter. When we have to sit there and sort of talk about ourselves or receive information about ourselves from somebody else, that is quite a difficult setting, and it's a difficult task. And it's basically based on the fact that our threat system in the brain reacts very quickly to anything that might threaten our identity, our ground values, who we want to be, and of course our ambition to feel competent, important, and to be seen as competent and important in the eyes of others. So I started feeling quite a lot of discomfort when I worked with feedback, and I said, this isn't the right way to go. So I started in 2016. Actually, I started to think a lot and reflect a lot and do some research about what is feedback, where does it come from, and how come that is the way we are supposed to communicate with each other in organizations. Because I never really understood that, but I just did it. The more I understood that there is no research that actually can validate the fact that we do prosper as individuals or organizations from feedback as a concept for communicating with each other. I just, all of a sudden, I felt a passion for bringing that to more people. And actually an intention to contribute to a shift in how we look at what is relevant to talk about in organizations. So in 2016, I actually invited people to a seminar, which was the absolute first context where I tested my reflections. I sort of, how do you say it? Provtryckte.
Yeah, I don't know what the expression would be in English. In Swedish, we talk about this like trial printing.
Yeah.
Before you actually do the printing, you do a trial to make sure everything is right. So that's, yeah.
And I was surprised how many people were interested. So I had a lot of people in the room where I could get their instant and instant reflections on my thoughts, which led me to thinking, this could be a movement. I would like to start a movement. So I continued having seminars, and then the pandemic hit. We did have a seminar. There were only 9 people in the room with 2 meters apart. But we did it in a room for 60.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's dedication.
Yes. But we did it. And then during the pandemic, I actually thought, well, maybe I need to bring it in another form and shape as well. So I started my work on the book.
On the book.
Yeah.
I love hearing, and I think a lot of us, myself included, are observing this shift. And the pandemic definitely accelerated it in many ways.
Yeah.
And for a lot of things. And I think we're still very much in confusion about what we're shifting towards, even.
Yes.
Just that we are questioning a lot of things. So that's always a beautiful place to start because it's very explorative.
Yeah.
I'm curious, of course, how would you then describe some of your conclusions? Like, what is it that you landed in is our, I don't want to say destination, but what are we moving towards instead? If we're moving away from feedback, what's the better experience?
So yeah, you can't. It's important when you do a revolution, when you're a rebel, that you just don't rebel about what you don't like, but actually try and try and contribute to something new, an intention, a direction. And I didn't want to offer an answer to this is how we should do it instead, in a very sort of boxed in model. I wanted to describe the capacities we need to use, or the competencies we need to use in order to communicate with each other so it becomes more meaningful for us. Because a lot of what I hear from people is that feedback is difficult, but it's also very often we don't understand the message. We don't understand what we're meant to do with the information that we receive. And sometimes we don't even understand where it comes from, which creates a lot of course, discomfort in the interaction between people, but also reactions which make people sort of move away from interaction with each other. So there is no meeting, or we lack that human encounter where we connect and where we can find a space where we can explore to understand each other, to learn from each other, to problem solve together, and to support and help each other. And I think that's what we need a lot of today to resolve a lot of the issues that we face within the organizations, but also outside, what we're dealing with, the challenges that we're dealing with. on a global level, planet level.
So not talking at each other, but with each other.
With each other.
Yeah.
Yes. Because we're, as you said, we're in a shift, and I've also heard the need and long for more human experiences.
Yeah.
Like you're not saying it's a revolution, but it's you're speaking for a shift, for more human experiences, and that's basically what I'm trying to do as well through how we communicate with each other. So I think we need to focus instead on building relations, not evaluating deliveries or productivity or whatever else it is we're expected to do at work. When we shift to focus on building relations and building safe relations, building trusting relations, we will release more of our potential, which means that we become stronger and better and more competent as a group or as an organization. And to do that, how do we build relations? Well, we need to focus on much more on reflection, like self-reflection. I need to understand myself, what can trigger reactions when I end up in defense behavior, and how I affect others when I do that, how I contribute to the dynamics of a group, for example. And I need to find acceptance for that so that I can make conscious choices of how I want to interact, so that I support the system or support the group or support another individual. And then, of course, sometimes we also need to reflect together in order to expand our thinking with the help of somebody else's reflection. And when we do that, we need to be curious about another person's perspective. So to choose curiosity as a state, as a mental state, or as an emotional state, this is something that we need to practice, because it's very hard when we're stressed or under pressure or cognitively tired, which we are most of the time at work, because I would say. We run from meeting to meeting. So we need to make a lot of conscious choices. And one of them is to actually try and be curious most of the time.
I love that. Be curious most of the time.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, I think, because I'm privileged enough to speak to a lot of different people who drive movement in different ways from different angles, whether it's feedback or self-leadership or belonging, or, there are any number of angles you can choose into this. And it would seem curiosity and self-awareness are two really, really core pieces of any angle you choose in this movement.
Yes. Yes.
Because it's an inside out curiosity, right? You just be curious about you and be curious about the other. And that's the way we also shift, I think, from the focus of being right or piling our opinion onto somebody to exactly what you're saying. How are we meeting each other and connecting and creating together instead, which is a really different state of mind.
Yes, it is. And what I usually hear is, but that will take time. But that takes a lot of energy. And I say, yeah, well, it takes a lot of time and energy to repair the damages of feedback processes as well. And we cannot connect that activity to any kind of higher purpose, because there is no research showing that there is a purpose or that there will be a result. But we do have a lot of research showing that if we engaged in these kinds of activities, there will be positive results on how we function and how as an individual and how we function together as a group.
So what I know you to talk about are more meaningful dialogues.
Yeah.
That actually have a mutual sense of benefit for both people in it.
Yes.
What
There's
does that
value.
look
Yeah.
like?
So it's very much based on reflection.
Mm.
We need to reflect before we go into dialogue with somebody else. We need to reflect while we're engaging in dialogue with another person. And we definitely need to reflect afterwards so that we can learn from it. I made a model, but it's not a model. It's a platter. It's a menu of behaviors, if you will, or actually abilities or capacities we need to use. And one of them is reflection, self-reflection and reflection together with others. Another one is to be curious and to explore. And we need to tap into the brain's functionalities for perspective taking when we do that, mentalizing, trying to understand another person's feelings, thoughts, perspectives, values. So we need to park ourselves for a little while and step into that other person and look at things from their perspective or their view, which is a difficult thing, but it's something that we can practice and get better at. But we need to use what we have as resources, our capacity for empathy and capacity for mentalizing or perspective taking. The third aspect or perspective or behavior ability that we need to work with or focus on and practice is how we can describe our own experiences, how we can become clear and predictable for other people so that they can feel safe with us, so they can trust us without projecting frustration or opinions when we do that. So we stay with our experience, our observations, our thoughts, our emotions, our needs based on the situation, not based on what somebody else did, but based on who we are and how we know ourselves. So being descriptive so that I can include others in my perspective is one part of meaningful conversations. And then I think a lot of the time we're also caught in our busy day of doings. And we want to do check on things. And we actually miss out on stopping for a while, taking time to actually appreciate what we've done, the small steps we've taken in a process, or appreciate somebody's contribution to something, or actually appreciating just somebody's presence. We do have a brain with a tendency for negativity. We have a threat system which is 5 times bigger or more developed than the reward system in the brain. So our first interpretation of things is very often that we rather look at what we haven't done than what we have done, or what was bad instead of what we did well, what you don't contribute with instead of what you actually do contribute with. I think we need to help the brain shift from negativity to positive outlook most of the time. And then I think we need to say thank you to each other a lot more than when we do. Show gratitude, because gratitude, if appreciation boosts our sense of status, our sense of importance and being competent, gratitude is more on a deeper level, more meaningful, and more on a relational level. So I see the good energy you have. I see your intentions or your ambition. I don't look at your behavior. I do see that you want to do your best, and I'm grateful for that. Helping the brain to shift from the default mode, negativity, or just fixing things and fixing others, just a survival, to being grateful for what we have or what we are or what we do.
I remember I facilitated some workshops also with a lot of the input from your teachings a few years back. And actually, I remember one of the core insights for some of the people in that workshop was, and it was so nice to see it on their face. They were like, oh, it's normal that I'm feeling negative or in doubt. It's normal. Yes, it is. And then the discussion was more, it is normal. Your practice is more about how long you stay there and how fast you're able to move through to something else or help yourself out of this fight or flight or threat response or wherever you are. It's not that you're there. Everybody starts there.
Everybody starts there.
Nobody gets away from having a threat response in their brain. We all do.
Yeah.
And I remember it was so nice when they had this sense of relief.
Yeah.
And then their curiosity opened.
See?
That's
what happens.
How do we do it? I would love to, just maybe dig in a little bit more to how do we help ourselves get out of that? Because it can feel a little bit like a whole, just this negative bias, problem focused. What do we do?
Yeah. Well, we're, as you say, we're quite quick to feel lonely and that we're the only one in the whole world that is there in that hole. And we're quite quick to judge ourselves for that. So the first step, I love that. I love that reaction and that insight and the relief and how they could experience the shift or the possibility to open up to curiosity once that relief was there. That's extraordinary. So in order to help ourselves, we need to get in contact with, we need to shift from judgment to empathy. And the way to do that, of course, is to say it's normal, because that is forgiving yourself and saying, accepting yourself for being human. This is what it is to be human. We're all struggling with this because we're hardwired like this. And now that I know that, I have the choice to practice, to shift and say to myself, or be compassionate with myself. So it's okay. Now that I'm aware, I can stop that behavior and I can try and choose another kind of behavior. So how would I like to act instead? Maybe I won't be able to do that in the situation where I am. Maybe I won't be able to do that fully next time it happens. And then I need to look at and see myself as an intentional creature. I'm just trying. And as long as I'm trying, I'm working from good intentions and I'm working from self-awareness, and praise myself for that. So we need to reward ourselves for trying instead of waiting to reward ourselves when we're done, because we're never done. We're never done. Thank God, because if we were done all of a sudden in the middle of our life, what would we do after?
Yeah, very true.
We'd be bored. Yeah. Or we would be a pain in the for other people, because we would be perfect and nobody could stand us.
No, it's very hard to empathize with somebody
who's perfect.
who's perfect. Yeah.
So thank God nobody's perfect.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, I mean, a lot of the things you talk about, they're quite profound. They require quite a lot of us, and it's not necessarily habits that everybody has, or things that everybody feels inclined or have a desire to even lean into
No.
because it's a bit uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I mean, I know you work a lot within the corporate space because you're talking about feedback. So what are some of the reactions that you get with this? What are both directions, resistance and taking it in?
Yeah. So I'm trying to apply the same ability that I ask of others when they work with themselves, which is patience, persistence, and resilience.
Yeah.
And be an acceptance of no, not everybody is interested in this just straight away. So what can I do to make people curious based on where they're at in the moment, and not expect more of people than they can, that they can offer in the situation. And then I have to self-regulate when I'm reactive to people's resistance. When I hear this is fluffy,
Yeah.
and sometimes
I've gotten that all of my career as well, I can tell you.
yeah, and that is a huge trigger for me. And sometimes I just say, if I hear the word fluffy again, yeah, and I've been rehearsing things to say back, but then I would be working with fight. I would be fighting, which isn't the best way to be if you want to inspire people, of course.
No.
So accepting that I need to be adaptable to how people receive this, and be curious about how I need to do it also, so that it becomes a collaboration where, but what I've found is that when I bring research-based input on the brain and connect that with what consequences that has for how we function from a psychological perspective, it's very hard not to relate to it or recognize yourself. And if I do it in a way which is normalizing, it's easier to take it, even though it is a bit scary or uncomfortable. Or so lowering the threshold for people to open up and to want to look at themselves.
That's a big thing.
Yeah. So lowering expectations on the speed of this shift.
Yeah. I'm just going back to this shift thinking also is I'm just thinking here you are, going into a space where feedback is serving a very clear function for many companies, and pulling that out and putting something else in which might not serve the same function is a scary thought. I'm curious your perception on this. Why do you think we hold on so tightly to the idea of feedback? What is it that we're using it for today in the shape that we're proposing it today?
Well, when it comes to habits and feeling safe, any kind of change is threatening. The feedback model as it serves us now is, of course, easy in the sense that it's a structure that you can hold on to, and letting go of that structure can be scary, and you don't know what you're getting instead. And then I come and talk about things that are quite difficult, and takes some self-reflection and some questioning yourself, or asking yourself questions about yourself. I think it's normal to react with resistance or with insecurity. And if there's no structure like the one we have built around feedback, then it's not an easy shift.
No.
So that's why I say that, we'll take that structure and look at that structure and see where you could integrate more of aspects of a meaningful conversation, so that you increase the level of meaningfulness in that feedback process. that's one step. But I know managers who have actually taken that piece of paper with the questions that they're to work with or from, and just thrown that away and started talking just with the person in the room. But of course, you also need the knowledge. So, I mean, there's an educational perspective to this as well. There has been feedback training going on for ages.
Yeah,
So
there is still.
And there is still, yes. So now maybe integrate other kinds of training, knowledge about how the brain works, knowledge about how to work with emotional self-regulation, knowledge about the brain's tendencies for negative bias. I mean, I could go on and on.
I'm listening to you. I'm also thinking that I've also spent a lot of years in the corporate space, obviously, and in many ways, I feel like we use feedback as an assurance to guide performance and to ensure people are doing what they're supposed to do or what is expected of them in many ways, and fulfilling a role. And I think this shift that is happening now is also putting into question that type of thinking in the sense that most of us don't live in a vacuum. We don't do things on our own. We create things together.
Yeah.
And so same as you, I'm questioning, what does the conversation look like that leads us to connect more and create more value together rather than, and you were talking about this at some point also, is how do we refrain from this judgment? Like piling our judgment onto somebody else's. This is what I think about your performance, or this is what I think about what you're doing, and why is my opinion and perception of this more important than the other person? I know last year I had a team and we were going through this performance evaluation process, and I felt really strange and weirdly humbled about it, because here I am and I'm in my 30s and I have people in my team who are in their 50s and they worked loads longer than I have. And I just felt, who am I to judge their performance? We can talk together about how what we're doing and what you're doing is leading to something or is contributing or connecting into what we're doing. But either way, it's like a mutual responsibility here.
Yes.
I really felt out of place to be judging anybody on this and putting a stamp of approval. At least for me, that's why I find a lot of peace in your ideas, is that they switch this focus, because, and it's hard, I think, because our organizations are also wired to control performance.
Yes.
And this is asking something completely different and a lot more maybe faith and trust before you actually see anything.
And now we're talking.
Now we're talking. Yeah.
Yes. And I guess that is the whole shift. That is the very difficult shift that is needed. The organization shifting from controlling performance to allowing for relations. Not just saying it, because a lot of organizations say it, but they don't work accordingly. But since communication is sort of the blood of an organization, it's the blood flow, it's the energy that creates how the organism of an organization works. I think that's one place where we could start. I was inspired by Brene Brown. She's done a lot of research on shame. And I think we underestimate how much shame is walking around in the corridors. at the office. And I think the feedback model and the feedback processes that we have to have or avoid having because of that there's a lot of people who have the same experience as you. What right do I have to? Why should I? So they avoid it instead, which can create a sense of shame. I'm not doing my job. I'm not a good manager. And she uses a metaphor of, because she touches on feedback as well. And she says, when we can sit on the same side of a bench, and I mentioned it in my book, so I stole it from her. If we can sit on the same side of the bench and look at something in front of us, sharing our respective perspectives on that, then we can start working with feedback. But I would like to sort of take that word out of our vocabulary. So I'm saying instead, then we can start to problem solve for real, which will boost performance.
I'm thinking some people might argue that it's also a question of how you define the word feedback.
Yeah, but I did some research on that as well. So throughout history, ever since, feedback became part of something we should deal with as human beings, because originally it's from, engineering and how you work with controlling systems to function in order to restore balance in a system. So they've been discussing the definition throughout history, since early 1900s, and we still do. But the ones I found, they're still about steering, controlling, and it's about restoring some kind of balance. It's not about development, and it's not about increasing insight. So the definition is very far from what we use it for, where we think it will open up, it will create cultures of openness. No, it's a feedback loop is meant to put something back in its original position.
Yeah, in the position where it's supposed to be or expected to be. That's interesting. And I'm also thinking of this in relation to whatever terminology we want to use, VUCA, or just the unpredictability of the world, which is that we don't know what's happening in 6 months.
No.
Most of us can't predict what's going to happen in 2 weeks.
No.
And then this tight steering might become very limiting.
Well, I guess when you're in a shift, you have one foot in the old way of doing things and one foot in exploring a new way of doing things. And I think the controlling part, speaking about new ways of doing things, but still controlling the system or controlling performance,
or the outcomes that you're going towards,
is a sign of the times and maybe necessary. But I think we need to lift that that foot who's still
in the old,
a little bit more, and dare move even more into the new unpredictable way of working, and rely on people's good intentions and trust that people want to contribute to the greater good, because that's how we're born. That it's deeply meaningful and deeply rewarding for us as human creatures to contribute to the greater good.
I love that you bring that up, and I share in your observation that sometimes it's also about how the potential of humans is perceived within an organization, and that a lot of performance frameworks are kind of rigged in terms of there are high performers and low performers. And and I have so much,
Yeah.
so many things to say about that, because as you're saying, you know, we all come with a huge amount of potential. And I've you know, very vocally also objected these things, and with saying, I think we're asking the wrong questions. We should be turning the mirror to ourselves as an organization and ask ourselves, are we aware of our people's potential?
Yeah.
Are we understanding where they can best serve? Are we making sure they are in that place and they are supported in that place? Then of course there's always the mutual responsibility. Nobody is free of responsibility when we're working together.
No.
But I share in that observation that there is something also about how we perceive people's potential, and that there are structures and organizations that would still look at people in like a rank.
Yeah.
Versus look at people as, you know, a huge untapped source of potential, whoever you are.
Yeah.
And that's also a shift. There are many shifts.
There are so many shifts that, yes, of how we talk about things, or the mindset we have towards things. I agree. I'm also, that's a tough one, because that's dehumanizing people, basically, categorizing people. But we do it when we're stressed. We do it when we're caught in a system under pressure. That is, we're controlling things and making things effective or efficient.
I really, I love, and I it popped into my head what you said in the very beginning, that if you want to revolutionize something, you have to not rage so much against things, but inspire towards something. So I really like that we've had that balance in this conversation. A little bit of raging against.
Yep.
Yes, we need to do that too.
Yes.
But a lot of just digging into what it could look like, and that it's not a set destination, and it's an exploration that we get to do together in our relationships, in our organizations, in our teams.
Yes.
So I always think with these like big concepts, it's always really useful to try and like bring it down to my level, me as a person.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's so ungraspable, these big shifts, these things that happen outside me. What have you seen to be some of kind of the most powerful actions that people take, or that you have taken, to boost these capabilities that you were talking about?
It's a good question. It is actually, it's a lot of small things, but some of them, one is to be observant of my own truths. And to dare question them. To find a space where I actually say, could I be wrong? I'm thinking this. Could I be wrong? And try and stay curious, looking for, there might be other answers, or are other ways of seeing this, or maybe there is no given answer. So maybe I need to stay in the discomfort of not knowing. I hear a lot when I talk about my model who isn't a model, meaningful conversations. But how do I do it? Or how do you do it? And I say, I'm sorry, but it depends. It depends on...
The worst answer you can give anybody.
I know.
Everybody's always looking for the little silver bullets and structures and just take them
Yeah.
and apply them. Yes.
Yeah. It depends on the situation. It depends on what the relationship looks like with the person that you're struggling to communicate with.
Mm.
It depends on what behavioral patterns you have. What is it you need to go from or shift from? So I'm saying, maybe accepting that there are no given answers right now. This is a time for exploration. And be humble and forgiving with yourself and say, if I can just explore, I can use this model, even though it doesn't give me from A to B, and just be curious and try. Maybe if I can be more curious in the next conversation with that person, what could that result in? What value could that bring for me or for that person? Maybe if I reflect a little bit more before I go into that conversation, or maybe maybe I'm too quiet when I talk to that person. Maybe I'm difficult to understand. So maybe I need to be more open and describe more of what I think and feel and what I need. Maybe that could contribute with value in the conversation with that other person. And just, well, yeah, I'll try that next time. Maybe I won't be able to manage doing it 100%, but yeah, to look at whatever I do as an experiment.
I love that. I just wrote down it as I was listening to you. It's just what I was hearing was this explorative self-talk.
Yeah. Trial and error, like we do when we're kids. We try and error, and we learn from it, because we haven't developed that voice yet who says, who judge.
Yeah. It's like, yes, no.
You're not good enough. You should have done better.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking all of these things are also a practice.
Yes.
Like the one thing you get better at is actually asking yourself the questions. It's not necessarily having any answers. It's just the question asking.
Yes, it's the question asking. Exactly. And the trying.
Yes. And the daring to try.
The daring to try. Yeah. I didn't write about it a lot, or maybe I didn't even write about it at all.
That's your next book.
No, but Carol Dweck.
Yeah.
Who has brought the growth mindset concept to the world, which is something you could also... So experimenting, not judging, thinking, I cannot yet, instead of, this is too hard. I won't even try because I can't, because I don't have the capacity. Because that very often when we think we're not interested in something is because we're doubting our ability to do it. So that's one way of defending ourselves against having to face potential failure.
I also keep thinking sometimes when we set our goal state too rigidly, it becomes very easy to fail.
Yes.
And it becomes very much about whether I got to this point or not in a super concrete way. And I mean, on a very personal level, I've always been this like overachiever persona in my early 20s and while I was studying, and didn't get that grade. It was terrible. And if I didn't get that, and as I worked my own way out of that, a lot of it became about more, how do I feel when I succeed? How do others feel when I succeed? What are the things I can contribute with? And then instead, you succeed a lot more often
Yes.
than you do if you're just waiting for that end result all the time, because your success is more accessible, but it's also more flexible.
Yes.
And you don't have to fixate on, if I did get exactly this thing or get exactly to that goal, but you don't know how it arrives. We don't know how it comes our way. So I also think sometimes this explorative is about also it's good to have direction and vision. I always believe in that, because it's nice to be facing something, and it's easier for us to move towards something if we have a sense of, at least some sense of what that is. But then if we lock it too tightly, it has to happen this exact way with these exact people, and this is good.
Yeah, no.
Then
it's setting ourselves up for misery when we do that. I think it's important to have a higher purpose with what the goals that I set for myself, and the higher purpose can give direction. Who I want to be as a person, who I want to be as a manager, who I want to be as a colleague, how I want to live my life, how I want to contribute to. And then the goal setting becomes those small steps towards that higher purpose. And that can be a lot of things. And it's about my adaptability, because one thing I'm exploring now together with my partner in crime is how we very often work with setting technical goals. We should achieve this by then. But on the way there, we need to work with ourselves as humans, and we need to be adaptable. But we're never, ever talking about setting goals for adaptability, and to talk about what we need in order to work with ourselves in getting there. And that can't be rigid, because anything can happen. And yes, of course, we can have self-awareness, but when we're facing new situations, we don't know how we'll react. So we need to have that psychological flexibility of taking it as it comes along. And then we need to be able to support ourselves in handling that when it is tough or difficult, or we risk ending up judging ourselves or checking out mentally and emotionally because it becomes too difficult. So lowering the bar is one way of working with not setting too rigid goals.
Or focusing on breaking it down more into, as you were saying, like rewarding how we are getting there, not that we are getting to the goal, but how we are moving towards it. Yes.
And reminding ourselves why we are striving there for direction. And it's better, of course, then that the purpose or what we're striving for is not something that we're moving away from, but something that we're moving towards too.
Our own little revolution.
Yeah. Revolution, evolution. Yeah.
Little revolutions.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because I'm also hearing this. You can, even if you're not calling it feedback, even if you're not practicing it the way we've been taught, it's still a tool to serve us in guiding and enabling us to both move towards objectives and grow as we're doing it. Instead of it being just this putting ourselves in place. It's more of creating this common movement. Which is beautiful, I think. And it also invites more people into that dialogue.
Well, we talk a lot about inclusion in the workplace now, because we also we need each other more and more and more. Well, basically, no. It's always been like that, but it's more apparent to us that we need each other more now, because more connected to a common challenge. But we also live in more diversity within the organizations. So yes, to enabling as many people as possible to move in the same direction is vital.
Yeah, enabling as many different people as possible to get on a train towards something common.
Yeah.
And still maintaining their differences.
Yes, definitely.
This is something I like about what you're saying, is that it's also a preserving of each person's perspective. And so it's beautiful to see that there are ways of creating space for us to exist with each other and not to necessarily have to become one another. But instead, how can we bring each of our gifts and uniqueness to the table, and what movement forward does that create instead? So center those things. That's a beautiful tool to have.
Wow, you put it so beautifully.
But listening and digesting all the things that you said.
You summarize it so lovely.
Any last words before we wrap up?
Any
reflections that are hanging out there for you?
Yeah, well, right now I'm a bit overwhelmed because we've touched on a lot of things. I'm inspired by you, and I'm very much motivated to continue this revolution towards meaningful dialogue, or towards more meaningful conversations. And another important thing to remember, which I forgot to mention, is that this way of communicating will increase the level of engagement in the organization.
So you get to tap into more of who people are and the potential that they have.
Yeah. Funny thing, but when we connect and when we feel valued, when people are curious about us, when people listen to what we have to say, something happens within us that fuels engagement, both engagement into the task, but definitely engagement in engaging in other people.
Yeah, which is equally important.
Even more, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of food for thought. And hopefully this conversation will spark more people to create little revolutions of their own.
That would be nice. Get on the train.
Get on the train. Join the shift.
Yay.
Yeah, just a huge thank you to you for sharing your knowledge, your perspectives, your exploration. And it's always a pleasure to learn from you.
Thank you. It's mutual. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Experienced Designers. I hope this episode brought you some new insight. A special thanks to Eva Hamboldt for sharing so generously of your research and experiences, and for spending this moment exploring. Don't forget to click subscribe, and as always, get in touch with any questions or suggestions. That's how better experiences are built.